Good morning, everyone. We have a few people still connecting, and we're going to get started as quick to close to 11 as we can. We have a lot to cover today. Carrie, you want to rock and roll?
Jump right in. Nice to see everybody. More faces showing up here. As people are coming in, if you want to rename yourself with your name and organization, that would be great. Also in the chat, if people want to type in what brings them here today. And also just for the rest of the call, if people do have questions as we're going through the slideshow, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll collect those and try to get back to as many as we can when we get to the end. People are still joining. So again, as you're joining, if you can rename yourself with your name and organization, that'd be great so everyone knows who's here.
Are you ready for Joe to share screen with the slideshow?
That would be great.
Go, Joe.
So welcome to, I think this is our second big group meeting report out for Policy Action 2025, following up on the spaghetti in the wall sessions we did last spring, where we first started to brainstorm what people wanted to do this legislative session. And all that work was boiled down into working groups who've been convening over the last month or two and working toward bill titles and bill intent and starting to frame those up as we get closer to cloture. And just to refresh everybody, the overarching goal of policy action is on the next slide. And just to read it, Maine's current uncoordinated approach to building places is causing real, unintended, and significant social, environmental, financial, economic, and cultural challenges, and requires the creation of a cohesive approach to land development, redevelopment, and placemaking. And we've been really excited by the really diverse and broad group of people who have jumped into Policy Action 2023 and again in 2025. So welcome to everybody who's new and to old familiar faces as well. On the call, we have a number of bus drivers who are leading up their working groups who we're going to hear from today, and a number of people who have been involved in working groups, as well as maybe some new faces. So again, welcome to everybody, and I'll turn it over to Nancy in the next slide to talk about where we are in the schedule.
Thank you. And as we're working through this morning, Joe Oliva with GrowSmart will be posting some resources in the chat. All of this will also be available afterwards. We'll share with you a link to the recording and other information. But Joe, if you can go to slide 3, an overview of the timeline for Policy Action 2025. This is a full 2-year process, if not a little bit more. And as you can see, back in May and June is when we started gathering ideas with the mural board, spaghetti on the wall, tried to organize them. And then July through September had the working group solidifying their ideas. October and December was really fine-tuning those to what's going to move forward as legislative proposals. That's what we're going to do a quick review on today. Legislative activity starts in January and goes through June. One additional date, not highlighted there, but for you all to be aware of, is cloture. That is the deadline by which bills need to be submitted. Bills are submitted by legislators. They become the bill sponsor, and they can have a number of co-sponsors. This year, for the first time I can remember, it is in January, not December, which gives everyone time to refine their proposals. The goal is to have fewer concept bills where there's just minimal information. So January 10th is a critical date for those who are moving forward with legislation. Excuse me. We will all be busy January through June with the legislative session. They adjourn mid-June. July through December, we'll be regrouping what passed, what didn't, what is more work that needs to be done. And then in December and or January, somewhere in there will be a second cloture of bills that can be submitted in the second session. This is much tighter. They have to be deemed an emergency and they have to be approved by the Legislative Council. All of the policy action bills that we know of are being presented now. Then the second regular session of the 132nd legislature runs January through April of 2026. And then after that in May, we regroup what needs to be followed up on, where do we want to have more activity, such as if a resolve passes where there's a working group that we want to track. So that's the overview of what we've got for the timeline for Policy Action 2025 following the 2-year term of the 132nd legislature. So we are ahead of schedule by 3 minutes already. I'm very excited. We have a tight timeline today where proponents of bills are going to be presenting. I think we're up to close to 20 at this point. So each bill has about 2 minutes. We're going to provide the overview. As Kara mentioned, if you've got questions, put them in the chat. Joe will be capturing them behind the scenes and we'll follow up with the bus drivers there. But because we wanted to keep it to an hour because we know it's a busy time of year. So this is the initial presentations as we move forward. I'm going to hand this off to Working Group 1, which is slide 4 for Joe. And this is Zoe Miller and Miles Smith. And I'll put myself on mute and let you two go through in a matter of just a couple minutes each bill, what you're looking at for the session.
Thanks, Nancy, and hi, everybody. It's nice to see your faces and a lot of great perspectives here. So I'm Zoe Miller. I'm the executive director with the Moving Maine Network, and we focus on improving transportation access for people who can't drive or struggle to afford transportation. Working with Miles on leading the transportation work group, which has a number of different directions we're going in. So I'll just go over the first 2 bills here and then hand it off to Miles. So we were very pleased to be successful in the Policy Action 2023 process to pass a bill, LD 1559, to strengthen the state Public Transit Advisory Council. And so that is now bearing fruit, and we'll have a report coming out in March with recommendations from some really great work that's been going on with folks involved with public and community transportation. So we are looking to put in a bill to advance those recommendations. It's pretty straightforward. I think was some of the high points of what the recommendations are looking to do is to get more sustainable funding for public transit agencies across the state, especially bus agencies, which get a pretty small amount of the pie, and also to kind of increase the transparency and the ability for folks, not just for the public, but for people who are running agencies to understand how funding decisions are made about the public transit money. The second bill that I'm going to talk about is still really in the sausage phase, and that is we're looking at ways to enable communities to slower speeds and to do more speed enforcement in their communities. We do think that overall this work is moving in the right direction, and the Department of Transportation has recently just updated its policies around speed setting. However, we think that we don't want to wait as long as it might take for us to go area, street segment by street segment to lower speeds. There's some really amazing work that's happened in Boston and in Seattle around doing blanket changes to speeds, and the data shows that, lo and behold, crashes go down when you do that. I know sometimes I'm like a lone person in the wilderness saying that it's not just street design. Of course, we want better street design. However, lowering speeds alone does make a difference. The data is there to support it. So we're looking at that. And of course, what good is a speed limit if there's nobody enforcing it? So more to come on those, and I'll hand it off to Miles.
Thanks, Zoe. So I'll just mention the last two on the list there. So the first one, develop sustainable revenue for transportation infrastructure. This is a big challenge, as many of you know, especially those of you working in transportation specifically. The governor's office announced that they were projecting a $313 million deficit in the highway fund between the requests and what is projected revenue for the next 2 years. That's a huge gap. And it was caused over a number of years. And it's one of those problems that has many causes, but no easy solution. Part of the problem is, as we know, the unsustainable trajectory we've had over decades of building road infrastructure that is expensive to maintain and does not necessarily serve our smart growth goals either. The sort of unplanned path and nature of our community development is borne out in our transportation policy as well. So we want to look at how we can raise revenues that solve some of that funding problem, but in a way that also supports the types of transportation that are more sustainable and also that don't fall disproportionately on the poorest users of our system. There was a Blue Ribbon Commission that studied this issue, came up with many, many different recommendations for how to increase funding, including various types of fees. We've looked at mileage or uses taxes. We've looked at direct charges for EVs, which do not pay as much into the highway fund because they don't use as much fuel. And we've looked at the suggestion to tie the fuel tax to inflation over time. But again, there's equity concerns with many of these solutions. We do think that EVs do need to pay their fair share because now that EVs are making up a bigger part of the mix, that's contributing to this downward spiral and this unsustainable path for our transportation budget. So we're still looking at it with sponsors and with partners, and we are interested in talking with any of you folks who have ideas or suggestions how to close this gap in a way that is equitable. And we continue to talk with members of the legislature on which exact solutions might help. And I'll also tie this a little bit to the reform of the Maine Turnpike Authority. Some of you who've been working in the sector for a while might remember that back in a couple of decades ago, the Maine Turnpike Authority contributed more to our overall state transportation budget than it does now. There were some very dry years in the 80s and 90s where the Turnpike Authority had actually been scheduled to be dissolved once its bonds for the original construction of the turnpike were paid off. That did not happen, and instead much of that revenue was diverted to paying for the other needs of the state in rural areas for public transit when we had some dry years in the highway fund. Right now, that's not happening anymore. The Turnpike Authority is saving all of it can to put into various projects, including the Gorham Connector, which would cost Maine at least $500 million over a 30-year period. And we're not sure that that's the highest priority transportation need that the state has. So how can we revisit that decision in a way that supports our many other transportation goals in the state? There have been other states that have done this differently, including New Jersey, which devotes 15% of its turnpike revenue to public transportation in that state. So we're looking with various sponsors at ways to study this issue and potentially get to a resolution that benefits all the parties. I think I'll leave that at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Miles. So we'll go to working group number 2. Joe, if you can advance the slide. This is the rewrite of the growth management law. Representative Melanie Sachs is the sponsor of the bill. She was going to present this morning, but she is sick, so I am pinch hitting here. This bill went through the legislative process last year. It ended this spring, did not move forward because it was one of 35 bills that the governor left on her desk for administrative reasons, I guess I would say. So it's coming back this year. The goal is to modernize the comprehensive plan process so that comp plans are more relevant to communities. Where we are with this right now is taking the language that was on the governor's desk last year and seeing what improvements can be made, because there wasn't universal consensus on the content of the bill. So currently the sponsors, it's Representative Sachs as well as Representative Tracy Geer, are working on the bill. Maine Association of Planners has a working group that has proposed amendments to it. GrowSmart is working in that space between the two. Maine Municipal Association is also involved, and the Maine Office of Community Affairs, Samantha Horn, because with the establishment of that new office, the Growth Management Act will be coming into her shop. So the details aren't done yet, but again, the goal is to, everybody seems in agreement, we need to modernize the act that, as they say, was established before the internet. And we're working out the details at this time with the goal of having consensus by January 10th. And if Joe, if you would advance to just the next slide. Again, for the recording, this may be helpful to you all. It's the process within a comprehensive plan. If you haven't been part of a municipal comprehensive plan, there's community engagement, assessing needs, establishing goals, mapping and visualization, and then, of course, having enough energy for the implementation plan so that the ideas and steps that are outlined in the comp plan are advanced by the community members. So that is working group number 2. And we can advance to the next slide, which is working group number 3.
Thanks, Nancy. Hi, everybody. My name is Francesca Gundrum. I go by Chess, and I'm the advocacy director for Maine Audubon, which is the state's oldest and largest wildlife conservation organization. And I helped as a bus driver for this group alongside my colleagues, one of which couldn't join us today, Ann Krieg, who's the director of community and economic development for Bangor, and then Matt Cannon, who I believe is on. And if you want to introduce yourself, Matt, go for it.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Chess. Matt Cannon. I'm the State Conservation and Energy Director with Sierra Club Maine, and I had the honor of bus driving with Chess and Ann. But I'll kick it back to you, Chess, and fill in wherever I can.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Awesome. Well, our group was tasked with reviewing how we can encourage development in the right places. So looking within 2 major buckets within our statutes. One, the subdivision statutes, and the other is site law, which we'll get into here in a minute. But which you can actually flip for me. Joe, thank you. Unsurprisingly, hopefully, Maine Audubon's here and other conservation groups are here because we care about protecting important places in Maine, important places for wildlife, for healthy ecosystems, for biodiversity, for sequestering carbon, you name it. And we know we need to we know that we need more housing, but we have to do it in a smart way. And we know that growth and conservation can coexist, and they have to. And one way for us to marry those two in a thoughtful way is to look at our subdivision statutes, which, as many know, of course, subdivisions are one of many housing options within the suite of options that we have in our state. But we can do better, and we know we can. But our group wrestled with this one quite a bit. We looked quite deep into our state subdivision statutes, and we have some ideas for how to move forward and how to clean up and modernize the law so that it's working better for communities, human and wildlife. And while we do have a lot of ideas, we sort of landed where we did, if those of you might remember, last time around, Policy Action 2023. And that was, let's establish a stakeholder group, a formal state-run stakeholder group where we get the right minds in the right rooms who can really comb through this statute and associated rules and make the changes that are going to work for all of us as much as possible. So thankfully, that's moving forward. And we are grateful to Representative Jack Ducharme of Madison, who will be leading this effort alongside all of us. So that's one piece. And the other piece, thanks, Joe, is looking at site law. Site law is one of Maine's sort of bedrock environmental statutes. And this law, I'm not going to read this whole thing for you, but again, for the sake of the recording, it helps to review larger projects, 20 acres or more, that'll have a substantial effect on the environment. And this is DEP reviewing, Department of Environmental Protection. And a lot of projects get reviewed at the local level, and some towns, some municipalities, some cities have more staff, have more expertise to review those plans, and some don't. And DEP has played a really important role in making sure that subdivisions, for example, larger subdivisions, are addressing areas such as stormwater management, groundwater protection, wildlife and fisheries, noise, etc. However, there are opportunities within this statute to make changes so that we are incentivizing developers to put housing, subdivisions, etc., in the best possible places for conservation, for people, and beyond. So we have not quite figured out exactly what we want to do with this one. It's a big one, and there are many conversations to come, but we're excited about this, and we do think that we will come up with some good ideas by the time we come around. So I'll leave it there unless any of my fellow bus drivers want to add anything.
All right, seems all quiet. We're going to move to working group number 4, which has just one slide. And again, Elizabeth Fraser and Tara Kelly, Elizabeth with Merida, Tara Kelly with Maine Preservation, were not able to be here today. So Kara Wilbur is going to hit the highlights on this bill.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so this one is reviewing Maine State Historic Tax Credit. Currently, we have a small project tax credit, but it hasn't really been functioning because of some of the criteria and thresholds in there. So this bill is intended to shift some of those around so that smaller projects can gain access to the state credits, which will benefit downtowns and other in-town properties. The goal is also to expand out to non-commercial properties so that residential properties can also qualify for the tax credits. And there's a bunch of riders associated with that one, if I'm remembering correctly from the last session. Eligible costs will include weatherization and rehab of certified historic homes where the income is below 120,000. And like I said, the threshold that is shifting with the new project ceiling at 10 million. And this bill also looks to eliminate the sunset on the tax credit, which keeps coming up. I don't know how many years go by before the sunset provision comes into effect, but it's been a very successful program. So the intent is to just make it live on so we can stop questioning it every however many years that is. I don't know if you want to add anything, Nancy. I know you've been a little bit involved in this one too.
I think you've covered it. The key is that last year there were 2 bills, one that supported large projects and one with smaller and non-commercial. And this time we're melding the two, and like here are all of the improvements that could be made to the historic tax credit. It's a really unique one across the country, And again, every 2 years, we have to go in and ask to extend the sunset so that developers have that planning window that they need. So we're excited for this one. The 2 bills advanced but did not pass. They came close last year, so we're bringing them back again this year. So that was working group number 4, and we advanced to working group number 5. There is 1 bill, and Sam Purrington is our policy bus driver for the land value differential, a constitutional review, which really sounds like a movie title when you think about it.
Yeah, it does have a movie title ring to it. So this is a more market-based approach to handling how we develop our places. So if any of you are a homeowner, you know about paying property tax, which is how most municipalities fund their expenses. However, the property tax has a handful of areas of improvement. One of them is that something I'm sure you're aware of if you own your own home, which is if you make any improvements, the value of your house goes up, which means you have to pay more in taxes. That the the value you add to your house goes into taxes, and that's sort of a disincentive to develop your house. If you want to add a garage with your apartment or a backyard cottage, you have to pay a higher property tax. And the flip side is probably more salient today, which is it makes it easier for people to let their house fall into disrepair, because if they let their property fall down, that's a tax break. And so you can get these people who are out of state, who are just trying to speculate on the land, who are able to do so because the tax is so low. Like if you think about Portland, there's so many parking lots and businesses that just run a parking lot because there's no property value there, so they're getting a very low property tax. And so the land value tax, or split rate tax, is a way to combat that by moving the tax burden away from those buildings and improvements and onto the underlying value of the land. So to what Nancy in the slide is referring to, we're trying to figure out what the constitutional status is of a land value tax. And so I'm working with Representative Mark Malone to submit a bill that classifies land and buildings as separate classes of property, which can therefore be taxed at different rates, to see if the Attorney General, which I believe is Aaron Ray right now, what he has to say about it, what his ruling is. And then if he rules that it is constitutional to have different classes between land and buildings, then that would mean that municipalities would be able to make that shift if they so chose. That Gorham, where I live, could decide we want to move the tax on the land because we want to develop the already developed areas like Gorham Village, where there's still a lot of places that are just parking lot. And moving the tax onto the land will encourage those landowners to either develop that land and make it return value to them by making a business or making a home they can sell, or they can just sell on that land to somebody who will develop it. So that's the idea. And right now we're just focused on getting the bill in so that we can clarify its constitutional status.
Thank you. And Sam, you've been saying in our conversations, this is a first step. Is it constitutional? And then the idea of moving forward with something meaningful once that determination is made. Great.
That's right. This is the first step. And then the next step is to start working with municipalities to see, if a land value tax is right for them.
Great. Thank you. We'll move to working group number 6, which is to advance state policies to improve municipal development capacity. Reminding you all, if you have questions about a specific bill or the process overall, put them in the chat. When we have time at the end, Joe is going to help us by filtering through the questions that are there with the time that we have going. So in working group 6, Kara Wilbur is working with Ed Libby and others, and she'll be presenting the bills in this package.
Yeah, and Ed Libby couldn't be here today, so I'm going to talk about these bills. One of which, the first one is reintroduce limits to municipal zoning in growth areas. Ed's been working on this bill for a couple of years. It was in the last session and didn't pass. But the idea here is to recognize that in some municipalities, zoning hasn't been updated to align with the comp plan. And so this is a way to encourage smaller lot sizes that are fundamentally walkable, sustainable within areas that municipalities have identified for growth. The next one is reintroducing the pre-approved building type bill from the last session as well. That bill was intended to have the state initiate a process by which to pull together a set of pre-approved building types that municipalities could then access and vet locally at their will to help create a more streamlined approval pathway for certain, pre-approved types in certain locations identified locally. And the state's role there was to reduce the overhead costs of that process because it can be quite expensive if a town's trying to do it on their own. So that is a tool for municipalities. Third on this slide is a state appeals board for affordable housing projects. We've gone on a deep dive into this topic. This is another repeat bill from last session, but we've gotten some great insight from New Hampshire, who passed a similar bill and who uses, they set up a court system to hear projects in that state. And then in Massachusetts, we've talked with them about their 40B process. We think there's some sort of combination between the two that would work well in Maine, but I think unlike either of those other states, the group has focused on trying to connect access to this process to local planning. So it's not for all projects, it's for projects in areas that are designated for growth locally, but where the zoning again isn't aligned with the comp plan. So it provides an alternative path for projects to seek approval that meet the tenets of the comp plan, but where the zoning hasn't been updated to reflect those goals. So that one, like New Hampshire, we're looking at sort of an alternative court system. So it takes the burden off the existing court system and also creates something that's less expensive and more efficient than the court system. And then I will turn it over to Todd for the next 3 slides.
Yeah, I won't read through all of these because some of it gets a little detailed. This is just here so you can review. This top one is kind of the overview of building codes. So even in places where zoning, like through LD 2003, can allow some of these more 4-unit buildings, some of the building codes still make it prohibitively expensive to build this way. So we want to take some small building code updates that have been made in other municipalities and states and apply them to kind of lower the barrier for production of these kinds of structures. So the top 2 are expanding the 1 to 2 family residential code to 1 to 6 or 1 to 4, as has been done in other places. And then also expand the building types that are allowed a single staircase or a single means of egress. And we, based off of our observations, we want to kind of set a charge to the fire marshal's office to make this update instead of being really specific about the exact language that we're going to update UEC with. Next slide, please. So the residential code, for example, we have North Carolina that has expanded to 4 units, Memphis, Tennessee that's expanded to 6. And we have some specific provisions about kind of what that would look like, as well as some links. Next slide, please. And then single stair, for example, is more about the kind of height and number of units in buildings that can have single stair. We already have some single stair buildings that are allowed, and this is just expanding that a little bit. There are a lot of efforts happening at the same time here. For example, Washington State has charged their building code development office with this, and then some other states have started to do kind of research. So what we end up with a bill here, and we're still kind of working it out, might be really directional, but moving in the direction of expanding the types of building options.
Sorry about that, when your computer doesn't do what you want it to do. Working group number 7 is continuing to advocate for government coordination. I'm one of the policy bus drivers along with Representative Adam Lee and Kara Wilbur. And we've got 3 bills that we'll be discussing today. Joe, if you would advance to the next slide. So the first is, this is a bill that passed last year. You'll remember I talked about cleanup work that needs to be done between sessions. Implementation of last year's Thriving Corridors resolve. In this bill, what passed was a charge to GOPIF, the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future, to convene agencies with the goal of better aligning funding of transportation and land use. There's a plan for agency coordination for state resources and to promote smart growth in high-use corridors. And have a plan for technical assistance grants for municipalities. The working group included Maine DOT, Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Economic and Community Development, Maine Housing, and the Department of Ag Conservation and Forestry, which is where the Municipal Planning Assistance Program lives. There is a report back from GOPIF to the Joint Standing Committee or committees with oversight here to receive a report. And that's due, I believe, in January. And what's exciting about this is that the legislative committee will have the ability to report out a bill as a result of any recommendations that come from this bill. So there's no new legislation this time, but it is paying attention to what we were able to pass last year to make sure that we have the impact that we want to have. And I'll turn it with the next slide over to Representative Adam Lee as the sponsor and the policy bus driver for the next one.
Sure. Thank you, Nancy. So in the 131st, LD 1674 passed in a very reduced form, simply allowing DOT to adopt rules to ensure safety for multimodal transportation. In this session, I'll be introducing an act to align housing and transportation priorities, which essentially re-ups, the unwatered down version of 1674, which has 2 components. The first of which is that it requires all construction projects over $500,000 to essentially ensure complete streets, multimodal access, confirmed connections with mass transportation infrastructure, and speech management techniques. The second component is the one that marries essentially our transportation infrastructure priorities with our housing priorities. And this portion would prioritize state funding for infrastructure projects that use multimodal transportation, mixed land uses, infill, affordability, density, walkability, and preservation of open spaces, wetlands, parks, farms, and woodlands. So essentially, it is our effort to make sure that our housing priorities are combined and married with our transportation priorities as a legislature. Hopefully working on both of those at the same time is a way that we can move forward collectively. I did that very quickly, and so I will move on to Kara.
This last one is looking at loss of mobility along state highways and the lever of the traffic movement permit, which ties in with permits and curb cuts along our state roads that is leading to a lot of significant sprawl between municipalities, making it more difficult for people to get from point A to point B, and still kind of digging in on this one.
Great. Joe, would you go to the last slide and we can begin to wrap things up? There are no questions in the chat. So we're going to, if you have questions, there's some discussion. I've been excited to watch the discussion happening about intersections between the bills because it's all connected, and happy to see that coming along. Let's see, Jen, so I guess so one question, where are the bills be found to review the wording that is proposed? It depends on where we are with the bill. You heard Kara said that one is very much in the works still. I know Representative Lee has language ready for his bill, the bill that we discussed in Working Group 7. So now that when we are done with this meeting, we will be updating the public information, and we'll be able to show specific bill language where we have it. As you know, with growth management law, it's still very much in the works and conversations are continuing. I don't even know if I could hazard a guess if it's half and half on ones where there's final bill language. Final being the, you know, how it's been submitted. Certainly there's more happening with public hearings to come after January. So that's my response to that question. Kara, if you've got any other response to that.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. And Adam Lee is sharing with you a link to the bill language close to what he's submitting this time. So as we're wrapping up, Joe is going to share in the chat. We're developing something new as we're learning from Policy Action 2023 into Policy Action 2025 and developing interested parties lists for each bill. And so this is, if you don't have the time or maybe the expertise or capacity to dive into the working group, but you want to be kept informed on what's happening, Joe's got the forms there. You can sign up for as many working groups as you want, and then maybe continue to refine it if there are multiple bills and you're only interested in one bill, but we'll keep working with that. The other things that we will share, and Joe, I'll hand it off to you about the calendar and fast democracy. We're trying to make this, again, as intuitive as it can be, that you're not relying on emails from us to be able to follow bills and engage as you move forward. So Joe, I'm passing it off to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. So the last two things I just put in the chat, first being the form to fill out as an interested party, that is part of what we're going to be doing in terms of making sure that everybody here and beyond is able to engage with the bills that they want to engage with. The second link that I put in the chat towards our policy action webpage is where you're going to find a lot of the information that we've shared today, both including the kind of content of the bills and the working groups and that information, but also resources that will help you stay engaged with these bills. The first being our public calendar that we've been working on that you can integrate with your own calendar if that's something you're into and want to keep track of. Through that public calendar, you'll be able to see when the working groups are meeting in case you want to sign up to participate as part of the one of these working groups, or that calendar will populate with information such as when committees are meeting, when cloture is January 10th, and some of the bigger things like that, bigger events like that. The other thing that we're going to be that's going to be on that page is a portal to Fast Democracy, which is the platform we use to track bills as they make their way through committees and are amended and all of the things that bills do. This is another service that you can sign up for that will send you emails and you can change preferences on and that type of thing. There will be more information on the webpage as bill titles are printed and bills get printed, and you can start to track specific bills. But all of those things are going to live on that Policy Action 25 webpage. I've also seen a couple questions in the chat here regarding signing up on the interested party form for multiple parties or for multiple bills or working groups. I think the way that the form has been set up is that for each working group or bill that you want to keep track of, you have to fill out an individual form. It's maybe a little bit more cumbersome for folks to do, but on our end, it might be a little bit easier just in terms of keeping things organized and able to process through. So I apologize if it's adding any extra kind of busy work for y'all, but that is just kind of the way the form has been set up. And yeah, anything else?
There's a question further up from Patty Barber. I guess it's a comment. For the state historic tax credit, New Hampshire allows tax credits to rehab historic barns on properties. That's a great comment, and I would suggest just touching base with Maine Preservation, and Tara Kelly is out right now, but I think staff should be able to field that comment. Nancy, do you have any other thoughts on?
I know it was part of the discussion last year, and I don't know if it's part of the bill right now, but again, this is the time to be getting that kind of feedback. So Elizabeth Fraser with Marita is working on this, and I can share that with her. And whether or not they chose to include that, or if they chose to focus on buildings rather than the broader I don't know, there's definitions of structures, like ships can qualify as historic, and they're not included in here either. So we'll make her aware of that. And again, if you join that interested parties group, then we can move forward, and you can connect with her there.
There's a comment from Kate Carpenter, but I'm not sure I really understand it. It
Is that
says,
the one that Todd responded to? It's hard to run things and
it says, I'm curious if there is an existing list in development of sample pre-approved building types. Oh, I think I got it now. In the municipal development capacity group. The answer is no. There's like a list of general types, but not specific building types or designs. That's part of the that would be part of the effort if the bill passes, that the state would do to establish those types through an open process.
However, the city of Bangor is finishing their process, and I can't wait to see what they come up with. Theirs is very targeted, but at least it shows what's possible. And theirs had a significant fiscal note as well. So it's a lot of work. It's a big lift for it. And what's interesting about it is it's pre-approved building types for certain parts of town. What is it that this community is comfortable with in this neighborhood, in this part of town? That's where the real value comes from. Other conversation, other questions. It's awesome to be able to give people back 10 minutes if we're able to. I'm going to look to Joe to make sure I've covered it all. This is being recorded. We will be sharing the recording out, a link to it, links to Fast Democracy, all of the stuff that's in the chat for further resources, so that you'll have that. You can also look to Build Maine and Grow Smart Maine on our social media. Join our email list so that you can be up to date. We'll send stuff out there as well. Things will be fairly quiet publicly over the holiday season as people continue to work on the bills. But again, it's just such a breath of fresh air to have the cloture be January 10th so that you're not trying to shut down conversation and get a bill at least put in at this point. And again, cloture is one deadline, plenty of time for further input in the public hearings or as part of the working group or interested parties through the work session. There's plenty more to come, but I'm really happy that you all joined us here today. Kara, anything else you want to say, or Joe, did I forget anything?
I was just going to note as a follow-up to this call, as a perk of registering to be on this call, you will all receive an email with the recording and some contact info for bus drivers if you have follow-up questions that maybe come to you 30 minutes after this call, whatever it may be. So all of the information that Nancy mentioned and more will be in an email sent out to this group. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you all.